So let me start by thanking our panelists. It's an exciting group that bridges business and academia we're going to talk about one of the key areas for the development of humanity, health. And it's a rather contentious field, if I may say so, filled with opportunities, but also with immense challenges. According to the OECD data, since 1976, life expectancy at birth has grown by 12 years, from 61 to 80 in developed countries. But at the same time as this happens, in Africa, every 15 seconds, a child dies. So this uneven development will certainly continue to have tremendous impact on how societies organize themselves and plan the future. Technology can certainly bring an added fantastic contribution to fill this gap. We know that the recent developments in medicine are tremendous. Things like having human embryo DNA edited to take out a disease, a pre-programmed drone that collects blood samples from residents at a rural village and travels back to the capital for testing. We know that these are they are no longer science fiction scenarios, but a reality in an era that some have called the golden era of innovation. The research ecosystem that is represented here plays a strategic role in this development, but it is not an exclusive role, because user-driven innovation is increasingly finding solutions to help healthcare professionals deal with complex challenges. At my own university, a platform created by a group of professors called Patient Innovation has led to 850 tested new patient-driven solutions, ranging from 3D prosthetic devices to a Faso soap, which was created by an engineer in Burkina Faso to stave off mosquitoes in a malaria-infected region. So the future of health, we know, won't be just defined by the innovations we set out to create. It will equally be shaped by how we respond and anticipate the challenges and consequences of each of these great advancements. Some burgeoning areas of medical research, such as gene therapy or immune oncology, are very positively disrupting cancer treatment. AI will drastically cut the time scientists and doctors spend analyzing data. Data-driven healthcare is increasingly impacting treatment and management decisions, and patients can provide real-time data about their symptoms through apps and the wonderful world of wearable technology. This is certainly a time of great opportunity for businesses and for industry, for science to foster collaborative knowledge alliances that will allow for rapid and consequential development. Personalized medicine is another area of development tailored to the unique needs, the genetic makeup, and the lifestyle of each patient is now an important trend in healthcare. But this new world, we know, does not come without challenges. And I mentioned the contradictions at the outset. One of the great challenges is, of course, the access of patients to these new developments. Who will have access, who will not? The strained funding of national healthcare systems in many countries. Decision data in data-driven healthcare. A recent article in the New Yorker was titled, "The algorithm will see you now," as if, instead of a medical decision, an algorithm would substitute those, until now, human-made decisions. The structure of caregiving and human-to-human relations in this scenario, and Deborah was talking about this in her participation in the earlier panel, is also a key element. We are now in a scenario which is already here, where in some countries robots take care of Alzheimer patients. So we have immense challenges, immense opportunities, and we'll be discussing with our panelists some of the ways ahead. I start with Charles Kiefer and would very much like to hear your thoughts on the Australian health system, the projected changes, the new possibilities, and the competitiveness elements in the system.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the organisers. It's an excellent forum. I'm enjoying it very much. In Australia, well, just generally, it's a combination of government-funded, there's universal cover, there's government funding in what they call Medicare and Medibank Private. Medibank Private is a private insurance group, so it's a combination of private insurance to supplement public coverage, which covers all Australians. And there's a number of other private insurers apart from Medibank Private, Bupa and so on. In 2019, the health portfolio in Australia was budgeted to spend about $92 billion, about 25% of the federal budget, the annual budget in Australia. The government's health reform agenda, they've got a 10-year plan, and it's based on about 7 pillars. I'll just read these to make it simple, and I've been given a very good brief here. Guaranteeing Medicare and improving access to medicines first. Number 2, supporting our hospitals. Number 3, prioritising mental health and preventative health. And mental health in Australia, sadly, costs the nation about $65 billion a year, and it's an area of prioritisation to help. The next one as a priority is reshaping Australian sport. And the physical fitness of sport is excellent. Life-saving and job-creating medical research, ageing and aged care, and the next and last one is a stronger rural health strategy. Now, the Australian government has established a $20 billion future fund. It's called the Medical Research Future Fund, which came out of government surpluses, and that is to provide a sustainable source of funding for vital medical research over the medium and longer term. The government has also established the National Health and Medical Industry Growth Plan to cement Australia's place as a world leader in developing medical technology, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, health and medical research. Now, the areas, there's about 10 of those, and I'll just read these very quickly, and then I'll give you 3 examples of where Australia and some of the universities have resulted in commercialisation with great success. One example where Australia's collaborated with another country, Canada, in improving the state of health, and a company which has become a giant in the world, which has 2/3 of the world's market share, and that's Cochlear in hearing. Now, the areas of prioritisation for health innovation and competitiveness set by the government policy are vaccines, genetic testing, regenerative medicine, stem cells, next edge medicine, autoimmune. Professor Doherty in Australia won a Nobel Prize for his work in the autoimmune sector, synthetic biology, preventative medicine, precision health, precision medicine, and medical device development. Now, so that's just broadly an overview of where we are, about $92 billion. So Australia's GDP is about $1.8 trillion. So the healthcare sector at 95 trillion, it's quite a lot. 95 billion, I should say. Now, the examples, the first example I'll give, which is a feel-good story, over the last 30 years, Cochlear has pioneered a hearing technology and it's formed in 1981 by Dr. Graham Clark. It now has 2/3 of the world hearing implant market, with over 250,000 people receiving one of Cochlear's implants since 1982. The market capitalisation of Cochlear on the stock market is $11 billion. That's one example. The second example is something Australia has done with in collaboration with Canada, It's an innovation in processing, accelerating medicine in the Therapeutics Goods Administration's Australian government regulator. The international collaboration with the regulators is bringing life-saving drugs to the market sooner and more effectively. Now, working with Health Canada, the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administrator, being regulator, has reduced the assessment and approval times for getting vital life-saving prescription medicines to the Australian market safely and providing a faster public access to these medicines, which is very exciting. The other example I'll give is at the University of Queensland. Now, the University of Queensland are one of the top 10 in the world in their research. They're the largest in Australia, not the largest university, but they've had more research in the healthcare space than any other university in Australia. And when the Honourable Deborah Wynne-Smith and Chad Evans visits Australia at the end of the year with some of the chief technology officers, we're going to go up and see the University of Queensland, of which Jane Wilson, my fellow chairperson, was Chancellor. And there is a milestone there which has helped women with cervical cancer. It's a huge milestone in preventing cervical cancer in women under the age of 35, and they're better protected now than ever before with HPV. HPV being the human papilloma virus. Now, the University of Queensland researcher, and in 2006, the Australian of the Year, Professor Ian Fraser, started this vaccination, HPV, along with his colleague, the late Dr. Jian Zhu. Now, in summary, the achievements, rather than read all this out, what are the achievements in a nutshell? In the first four years, firstly, the current vaccinations protect against 70% of cervical cancers, 90% of genital warts, 70% of vaginal cancer cases, and up to 50% of vulva cancer cases. Now, two main achievements. The first 4 to 5 years after the program started, and bearing in mind this was only rolled out in 2007, in the first 4 to 5 years after the program started, HPV infections of the types that are included in the vaccination decreased by 77% in 18 to 24-year-olds, which is wonderful savings of in people's health. And the next, pre-cancerous abnormalities decreased by 34% in those aged 20 to 24 years of age. And so that is a wonderful vaccination program which emerged out of the University of Queensland, and we're very proud of the work that's been done there and saving and improving the health of those people. So I'll stop there and leave it over to you.
Thank you. Well, perhaps following up on what you're saying, and I will change a little bit the lineup and go to Damián Refojo, because the achievements that Charles, you've presented about the Australian landscape, they result certainly from a partnership between the research ecosystem and business, an intervention, a strong leadership of the government, but also supranational alliances, as the one with Canada, right? And I would like to hear from Damián how, as a researcher with responsibilities in a leading research institution, how can research position itself in this ecosystem? And what is the role of fundamental research in this regard as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that actually that's a critical question regarding the connection between basic research and innovation. Something that I guess, unfortunately, not so often is listening this kind of discussion panels. Because actually, I mean, the institution we have here is a research institution associated to the National Council of Science, CONICET, we call it here. But actually, we are, as you mentioned, a partner institute of the Max Planck Society, and perhaps I should start explaining just shortly what is that. Basically, the Max Planck Society is one of the top 5 scientific institutions worldwide, basically involved in developing basic research, probably together with the Wellcome Trust in UK and the Howard Hughes Medical Institutes in US, the larger ones. And what I was mentioning before is precisely the link between basic research and innovation, because probably in the general public there is a kind of idea that basic research means, okay, some crazy guys looking into the microscope how some ants move in this or that direction. But I think that this is a kind of thought that is very, very important that we change completely. And the Max Planck Society is a very good example of that, because it's followed by one principle, doesn't matter the name, it's called the Harnack principle, that the idea is that the public sector that is in charge of funding basic research, basic science, do not have to follow programs. Now, that this is one of our classical discussions with politicians, right? So, no, the politician comes and tell you, this is what we need, this is what you have to do, and you have 5 minutes to solve it. Well, I'm sorry, but this is not. Yeah, this is not how science works, right? So, the Max Planck Society is not following that rule, but rather the opposite. We don't care about programs, we care about people. Basically, the most bright, brilliant scientists that you can get. And once you identify those guys, basically, you give them what they need. What is, I know, 2 very precious things in this world: time and money. And with time and money and sustainability in the time is how science will create breakthrough innovations. And this is the difference between incremental innovations, that is what basically what we used to see in the industry, right? Low risk, basically based on the improvement of already defined devices or approaches or methodologies, and breakthrough innovations, which are highly, highly risky. Yeah. And examples of these are, for example, the X-rays, the magnetic resonance, the paternity test, all kind of things that you were mentioning before about how to manipulate the genome, which is the future, how to produce the immuno-oncology that you mentioned before. All this is based in technologies which rely on the generation of proteins, basically purified proteins, which are extremely expensive, and this is something else that I would like to discuss later on. All these things are coming from basic research, curiosity-driven basic research. And this is what I guess, unfortunately, very, very few countries around the world have really identified that approach as a valuable one. And I think that this is what hopefully someone here, perhaps in the auditorium, could change that way in our country as well.
Thank you, Damián. But then it is extremely important, strategic for governments to support fundamental research. It's costly. It's the node of further developments in science. But we also have to deal with issues of translational research and access to the technology. Matthew, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just wanted to build off Damián's comments there, really. So you have the fundamental research, and certainly that's part of a whole ecosystem that makes up healthcare and these sort of health frontiers that we're talking about today. So in the UK, what you just described is exactly a picture that we're doing in the UK, where we have our basic research groups within our faculties. We are also investing in external institutes like the Francis Crick Institute, which is a biomedical research centre. It's a national centre in the UK, and we invested 40 million into that to have that as a part of our basic research arm. But also because we know that basic research is a start of a long pipeline, like every pharmaceutical company knows. It's part of an entire pipeline of research. And it's about really about how fast you can translate that whatever it is, that innovation along that pipeline that is really valuable. And what we've done at King's is we've created that pipeline from going from the basic research, whether it's at the Francis Crick or whether it's in our own faculties, and we are linked directly to 4 hospitals so that we can move things directly into phase 1 clinical trials and further into 2 and 3, so we can move it relatively quickly into sort of the commercialization space. We have, alongside that, we've developed commercialization arms as well. Some are accelerators, and some are just a link to venture capitalists. So depending on what the type of technology or therapy that we are developing, can be then picked up and be seen by those people externally who might want to also come in and invest into that to help us move it along. And we're very open in the style. Today, I think there's been some messaging coming through all of the panels about being able to be open and to work together. And again, following on from the comments here with the Max Planck, it's being able to engage with other research groups, other clinicians, other commercial bodies around to link together our technologies so that we can develop these therapies to the patients faster. For things, and one example I'll just give before I stop is also around technology. So we're talking here about medicines, but the whole frontier is really around the AI space, the big data space. It's the med tech space, what technologies we can bring. It's the wearable devices to monitor people as they're wandering around, so we can anticipate potentially when somebody is going to have an epileptic fit, or the dementia onset is going to increase or accelerate. And certainly in the med tech space, one thing we are doing at King's is to bring in commercial companies that have potential technologies, and they could be large, well-established companies or smaller SMEs, and bringing them, actually opening the doors and inviting them in to come and work directly with the practitioners who are actually going to do the work, so that they can get feedback directly into their pipeline to say, this will work, that won't work. This is how it should work. If for this type of patient, the patient group are telling us it's just not going to, a wearable like that is not going to fit that type of activity. So we can actually have that feedback loop straight back into basic research so that they can take that back into their innovation pipeline. And that's something that we feel is very important, getting close together so we can have real discussions about real innovations.
You mentioned the role of SMEs also in this regard. This is not something from the private sector, not simply for big companies. Javier, you are in a SME. What do you think is the contribution that SMEs, and specifically in your case, in the Argentinian case, their contribution to boost precisely the advancement of technology in the field of health?
Bueno, yo creo que en este ecosistema las pymes tenemos que buscar nuestro espacio. Están los grupos grandes de investigación, están los emprendedores, los investigadores, y las pymes tenemos que encontrar ese espacio en este ecosistema. Y lo que hemos visto es que generalmente una pyme crece por una idea innovadora de un emprendedor, pero con el tiempo se va convirtiendo en un administrador de la misma idea. No va generando nuevas ideas, va perdiendo esa capacidad, porque por las funciones de lo que va haciendo lo lleva a hacer otras tareas. Entonces creo, yo como dirigente de una cámara pyme, nosotros tenemos que trabajar en ese lugar. Y también nos damos cuenta que la investigación, lo que tenemos es una ventaja. Nuestras mismas debilidades son las ventajas. El tamaño de nuestras empresas nos produce debilidades con compañías grandes para hacer grandes desarrollos, pero también nos permite ser muy rápido en la toma de decisiones, con lo cual creemos ser complementarios. En muchos casos, en este desarrollo de la tecnología, como ahora se está planteando, como nuestras empresas son pequeñas, muy rápidamente se pueden hacer prototipos, experimentos que llegan rápidamente al mercado, porque nuestra relación es muy cercana con ese mercado. Esto nos está produciendo constantemente posibilidades. Y después también aprovechar el sistema científico nacional que hoy tenemos. O sea, a veces nosotros decimos, no podemos tener un grupo de investigación, no podemos tener un grupo de desarrollo para hacer determinados trabajos. Pero esos grupos están en el país, esos grupos ya están. Solamente a veces los tenemos que contactar y nosotros ser solo quizá el primer paso. Poder llevar ese producto al mercado, porque ya lo pasamos de la idea, del investigador, después a una experiencia probada, a ya tener un producto en el mercado y ya tener muchas experiencias. Y eso es mucho más fácil ya para que esa tecnología o esa innovación la tome una gran empresa. Ahora, creo que lo fundamental para esto es generar ese ecosistema donde cada uno cumplimos el rol, el emprendedor, el investigador, la pyme, porque la pyme, no nos olvidemos, por lo menos en nuestro país, genera 80-90% del empleo. Entonces digo, no hay que perderlo de vista y perdimos muchas veces esa capacidad de innovación, de vincularnos con otros. Nosotros tenemos muy buena experiencia con el sistema científico nacional, con investigadores del CONICET, con investigadores de la UBA, de sus diferentes ramas, y lo otro que pudimos lograr, también porque somos pymes y eso lo podemos hacer en forma rápida, los trabajos multidisciplinarios, donde ahí vemos que una tecnología, no sé, hoy nosotros trabajamos con nanotecnología, nos apoya la Fundación de Nanotecnología, la USAN, la UBA de farmacia, y lo incorporamos con otros profesionales de la electrónica y juntos conseguimos un producto muy bueno, pero con una forma de diagnosticar y de aplicar que tiene que ver con otra tecnología y es muy rápido. Proyectos que estamos llegando a un prototipo en menos de un año, o sea, tomando los conocimientos e intentando nosotros ubicar el espacio en ese ecosistema, ¿no?
Now we are getting questions from the audience. Our time is running out, but I think it is very important to put these questions to the panel. One that is specifically to Damián, and two others that will go for the whole panel. So the question for Damián is, how can it be ensured that the maximum amount of funding is spent on research rather than on administration, bureaucracy, and other affordances?
Sorry, rather than
in administration and bureaucracy.
Yeah. Okay, I think that this is a relevant question, but the answer is pretty simple. If your organization is not bureaucratic per se, then basically the money will not be spent in bureaucracy for one clear-cut reason. Mm-hmm. The scientist wants money to make science, not to be spent in administrative stuff. So it's very important to generate ways that the money goes directly to the scientific sector, with us minimizing the amount of intermediate steps. That is clear, and this we know here in Argentina as well. I mean, as long as the money doesn't come directly to the National Council of Science, for instance, or the Ministry, well, now Secretary of Science, and goes through economy and to the different, then the money is lost. I fully agree.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I might just add
just
there.
briefly, because we're...
the Australian government have taken a very commercial approach to the $20 billion they put in the fund. They don't have to put that in there just to give out money like a gift. Mm-hmm. So there's a strict commercial criteria requiring participation from the private sector to justify the rate of return, and based on a properly validated business plan, which is subject to competition. The second thing I would say is the superannuation industry, which is the same superannuation is the same word as pension in Australia. It's fully funded, as I mentioned yesterday. It's the third largest fully funded in the world. It's got $2.7 trillion Australian dollars in assets in it now, and within 5 years it's growing to about $5 trillion. Now that fund, out of those funds, fortunately, what's really heartening, in just the last couple of years, the CSIRO have created a fund in medical science to do work to commercialise medical devices and other medical products and other things. And 4 superannuation funds have invested in that $145 million. Host Plus, Australian Super, Hester, which is 80% women, mainly nurses, their savings, and also the construction industry super fund. So there are 70-odd super funds in Australia, and it's just starting. And if the private sector can demonstrate that they can give rigorous commercial, attractive propositions to the superannuation funds, the money's there.
Now, just the two final questions, which are more general to everybody. One has to do with regulation, the impact of current regulation on the use of technology. And the second one is ethical, actually, the risk of genetic manipulation and how you see that going in the future. So who would like to, Damián or Matthew?
Matthew? Dive in on regulation. I mean, the question has come up a bit earlier as well about the speed of innovation, the speed of how technology is advancing actually much faster than regulation and in many ways ethics as well. I mean, we've seen that in the UK where Google and one of our health trusts was actually deemed to be coercing in illegal activities where the trust actually gave over 1.5 million files of patient data to Google to work on without properly seeking authorization from the patients. And that's simply just because at the time it was just seen to be a research project, not anything more advanced than that. But obviously that they hadn't anticipated, they hadn't appreciated what they were actually dealing with and the ethics behind that. And it's aligning, you do have to align, although it may in some cases slow down progress, you do have to align these things, especially when you're dealing with something like patient data, which in this case contain things like HIV details and things like that. So you do have to be very careful. But I think there's a definite call to policymakers to say, how can you streamline your processes so that you can move at a similar speed to where the technology is going? How can we make it quick so that we can advance quickly, so that actually we can get to the patients and actually resolve those issues going forward? So there's a call, I think, to policymakers out there, and I know there are some in the audience, so it'd be good to hear from them at some point about how they can help us progress faster.
Javier, on regulations and the impact on the industry?
Bueno, pienso igual que él que los avances son más rápidos que las regulaciones. Esto es indudable. Eso va a depender mucho de la responsabilidad de cada uno de los que estén involucrados. Ahora, claramente hay un avance trabajando por lo menos en todo lo que es tema tecnológico, de recopilación de datos, de información. La otra vez se hacían una pregunta, dice, si uno se dejaría atender por una máquina o por un médico, y me pareció que la respuesta acertada fue decir, en poco tiempo nadie se va a dejar atender por un médico que no responda a un sistema, a una máquina. Creo que la tecnología ya ganó su espacio y los gobiernos tendrán que ver cómo se pueden ir acomodando en el tema regulatorio.
And very quickly, less than 1 minute, genetic manipulation. Damián.
I think that I wouldn't call it a myth, but genetic manipulation is a fact. Is already happening. Is the future, and we have to. Science itself is taking all the controls and cares in order to be this technology safe. But forget it. This is going to happen 100% for sure. The question for me, I know we are running out of time, is who will have access to those kind of approaches in the healthcare system?
So thank you very much. We're running out of time. Thank you very much, the 4 panelists, and for this discussion that can certainly continue outside. Thank you.